I am so excited to welcome you all to the Data Capitalism and Algorithmic Racism webinar. This is also the official launch event for our brand new Data Capitalism report and interactive site that we launched yesterday and Monday. And the excitement and energy that it's contagious from me comes from the fact that it is over a year that we worked on this report, coming together as DMOS and as Data for Black Lives. Little did we know when we started this process, right, that our collaboration and the ideas that we were putting forth would be tested through this time, right? The COVID-19 pandemic, worldwide uprisings, exposing the impact of state violence and the use of data weapons and technologies to annihilate lives, right? So I'm just so happy that this is an idea, this is a report, this is a collaboration whose time has come. And I'm joined by a list of esteemed panelists that I'll get into, and I'll let them introduce themselves later as we get into the discussion. But I wanted to take the time to, thank and lift up my amazing co-author, Amy Traub, who, in my opinion, is one of my greatest econ heroes, one of the most important minds of our time. And again, Amy, it's been an honor to work with you this year. You're going to have time to speak from the DMOS side. But now I just want to situate, at least for us at Data for Black Lives, what this means. And, the report Data Capitalism, I hope you guys have had a chance to read it and engage with the microsite and share it and talk about it, bring it with you places. But it comes out of this partnership, and it comes out of work that we had begun at Data for Black Lives, thinking about the role of big data, the role of big data technologies, as well as this call to action to abolish big data, right? And in the report, we define data capitalism as it's a term that used to describe an economic model built on the extraction and commodification of data and the use of big data and algorithms to concentrate and consolidate power in ways that dramatically increase inequality along lines of race, class, gender, and disability. We are building on amazing efforts of folks for decades who've been writing about surveillance capitalism, the weaponization of data, but we really want to focus on the role of the racial disparities that are historically rooted and how that is translated to the incredible power and economic disparities we're experiencing today. A lot of the research around the connection to slavery came out of, as I said, Abolish Big Data, where I spent time in the archives in Amsterdam, doing a lot of research, really understanding the foundations for the power structures that we are experiencing today. And pushing forth this call to action, as I said, to abolish big data. And what does it mean to abolish big data? It doesn't mean to end the use of all data, quite the opposite. The call to abolish prisons is not a call to abolish accountability, but to abolish a punitive, violent system that is simply not working for society. When we say abolish big data, we mean dismantling oppressive structures and industries that surround its use. We understand big data as being more than a collection of technologies, a vast amount of information and different types of it. It is more than a revolution in measurement and prediction. It has become a philosophy, an ideological regime about how decisions are made and who makes them. It has given legitimacy to a new form of social and political control that has taken the digital artifacts of our existence and found new ways to use them against us. As we talk about in the report, big data is not new. It's not as novel or as revolutionary as we worship it to be. It's a part of a long and pervasive historical legacy and technological timeline of scientific oppression, aggressive public policy, and the most influential political and economic system that has and continues to shape this country's and world's economy, chattel slavery. Data for Black Lives was founded on the belief that we have the opportunity with data to reclaim it and to abolish, reimagine, and create new structures of knowledge production, new forms of decision-making, and new ways of relating to each other. And the possibilities with this is infinite. Because of the enormity of the threat and how scary it can feel, the discourse has been very negative and fatalistic, but this does not reflect the agency of our communities and our movements. We don't want people to give up and get overwhelmed. We want people to create alternatives. Ultimately, again, to abolish big data means, in most simplest terms, to reject the structures that concentrate power, the power of data, into the hands of a few, and to instead put it in the hands of people who need it the most, who will use it. People like our amazing panelists today, Chris Smalls, who's joining us from the front lines of organizing workers against Amazon, really building a blueprint and creating a legacy for us to defend workers' rights in the age of big data and in the future. Erin Shields, a part of MediaJustice, who's working head to head, toe to toe with big platforms like Facebook to fight for our civil and human rights. Tracy doing incredible work at ACRE to push forth the very demands that we are uplifting in this paper. So much that I'll allow folks to talk and introduce themselves. But for now, I will pass it to my awesome co-author, Amy. And before I end, Aki, you didn't want to go on video, but I want to lift up our Director of Policy, Aki, who came on 3 months ago, but in that time, 6 months ago, took on the report and built, and with her team who made automating.nyc and in her role at D4BL, built this wonderful site that you all are seeing. So Aki, I want to thank you too. But Amy, you have the floor.
Thank you, Yeshi. That was so powerful. It has been a tremendous experience to collaborate with you and to benefit from your brilliance on this project. My name is Amy Traub, and I want to welcome everyone on behalf of DMOS, which is co-sponsoring this event alongside Data for Black Lives. DMOS is a dynamic think tank that powers the movement for a just, inclusive, multiracial economy and democracy. DMOS works to fight racial capitalism and autocracy through an interdisciplinary approach that combines legal expertise, research, advocacy, multi-platform communications, and deep partnerships with grassroots organizations from around the country. With this integrated model, DMOS champions solutions for a politics and an economy that will break the hoarding of wealth and power at the top, and instead move us toward a society where Black and Brown communities have the freedom to thrive. At DMOS, we believe that advancing the vision of an equitable and inclusive society requires shifting power along 3 dimensions: economic power, political power, and people power. And accordingly, DMOS's work is organized around 3 core ideals. First, we have economic democracy, creating opportunities to move economic policies and institutions toward democratic public control by Black and Brown communities. And our work on data capitalism is part of our new focus on economic democracy. Next is political democracy, creating strategies for full participation by Black and Brown communities through voting and collective power. Then there's movement building, centering and strengthening the leadership, ideas, and knowledge production of Black and Brown movement organizations and leaders. So that's what we're about at DMOS. If you haven't heard, we also recently announced that Taifa Smith Butler will be joining DMOS as our new president on July 1st. Taifa is currently the CEO of the Georgia Budget and Policy Institute, where for nearly 10 years, she's advocated for economic opportunity for working families and children in Georgia. She is a leader and an advocate for racial equity and economic justice, and has been a member of our board of directors at DMOS since 2017. So we are really, really excited to welcome Taifa as our new president. I actually wish she could be here today, but she's still doing important work in Georgia. We're also planning a welcome celebration for Taifa this fall. So if you are on our DMOS mailing list, we look forward to sharing that invitation with you in the coming weeks. And in the meantime, I just want to welcome you to this panel on data capitalism and algorithmic racism. As Yeshi said, it comes out of a collaboration between DMOS and Data for Black Lives that began with an in-person roundtable back in 2019. We were in person back then. I think a few of you in our audience might have been part of that event. And fortunately, Yeshi Milner was part of that event. And I'm really pleased to have had this opportunity to work on this project with Yeshi over the last year and a half. We look at how data capitalism and algorithmic racism appear everywhere in our lives, right? Where big data is used to make this increasing array of high stakes automated decisions about employment, investment, lending, and pricing in the private sphere, and really important governmental decisions in areas that include criminal justice, education, and access to public benefits. We'll get to talk about some of that today. And the report, I want to say, is a synthesis. So we are really deeply indebted to the work of numerous scholars, including Ruha Benjamin, Joy Bulambini, Caitlin Rosenthal, Simone Brown, Tracy McMillan-Cottom, Kay Sabeel Rahman, Virginia Eubanks, and many others, in addition to the original research that Yeshi and myself have been involved with. We don't just talk about the problem, we talk about solutions. I think Yeshi summed that up really well. And we conclude by lifting up the work of some groups that are fighting for change, some of whom we are so lucky to have represented on our panel today. So on behalf of DMOS, thank you panelists, thank you audience, thank you especially Yeshi, and I'll throw it back to you for some introductions.
Wonderful. Thanks, Amy. So I think actually now we're going to switch right into our panelists talking, introducing themselves. And this is how we're going to structure the conversation. Folks are going to have about 3 minutes each to talk about their work. And then I'll go into the first question, which is specifically, how does the problem of data capitalism show up in everyone's work? The second question, just as a preview, is a bit more about solutions. So you folks will be able to hear that too. And then we'll go into a Q&A. So I see some people are already putting their Q&A questions. Of course, as you listen to people, feel free to pop them in. We have Aki, who's on the back end, as well as Alex, taking the questions, and then I'll be asking them at the end. So Amy, I think you're actually up first.
Yes, thank you, Yeshi. I get to, let's see, oh good, I'm spotlighted, that's what I see here. I get to introduce myself again, this time as a panelist. I'm still Amy Traub, and I'm the Associate Director of Research at DMOS. You had asked earlier, Yeshi, about how we came to this work. So I'm gonna say a word about that. For me, it comes from wanting to live in a more equitable country and a more just world. I went to graduate school in political science, and I dropped out of a PhD program to go and work for the Hotel Employees Union, or supporting campaigns to organize hotel housekeepers where I live in New York City. From there, I went into the policy world, working with unions and workers' organizations to promote the types of policies that would help them build power. About a decade ago, then I came to DMOS, and I started to research credit and debt and racial wealth inequality. As a white woman, I'm working to expose the decades, and we know it's really centuries, of public policies in this country created by white policymakers that enabled white families to build wealth, but largely excluded Black and Brown families. And we know that it's not just a thing of the past, right? To quote our former DMOS president, Heather McGhee, that's a history that continues to show up in our wallets every day. So that's where I come to data capitalism, thinking about racial wealth inequality, unequal debt, and how lending and credit reporting systems end up reinforcing racial disparities. That's the system that I really want to dismantle. And so what do we actually do about it? I've had a chance to work with partners on policy solutions that build power, lift up solutions that Data for Black Lives and others are developing, and to really disrupt these systems and start using data to promote equity instead of white supremacy. That's what brings me here.
Awesome. Thank you, Amy. I will now pass it to Chris. Chris, take the time to introduce yourself and how you got into the work. So Chris might be having some issues connecting. As I mentioned, he is actually currently probably on the ground organizing in front of an Amazon distribution site. So while we give Chris some time to get connected and on, how about Erin? You can take the time now to talk about yourself and how you got into the work and more about MediaJustice.
Sure. Thank you so much for inviting me to join. I actually remember attending the Data for Black Lives conference all those many years ago, the very first one with my co-organizer, MyAsia, and then later bringing a delegation of local organizers to the second one. So really exciting to see how it's, shifted and transformed and, brought us to this moment. Like Yeshi said, my name is Erin Shields. I use she and her pronouns, and I am based in Washington, D.C. I'm one of the national field organizers for MediaJustice, an organization fighting for the racial, economic, and gender justice in a digital age. We're also the host of a network that includes almost 100 community-based organizations, which ranges from anything from community media, social justice organizations, artists, and more. And together we're fighting to advance a media and tech environment where all are represented, connected, and free. Our organization covers a whole host of issues. I usually say that anywhere tech and race intersects is where you'll usually find us. The issues that I currently cover are disinformation and how it impacts our communities, and platform accountability, covering anything from content moderation, hate speech, to censorship. And how I got into this work, I was actually thinking about that, was that actually my first full-time job out of college was working at a lobbying shop called the Internet Association. Some of you may be familiar with it. And I was actually assisting tech lobbyists, but obviously on the side of companies. And during the same time, I was sort of being politicized. There was a lot going on. This is, after the trial of George Zimmerman. I live in DC, so I was seeing gentrification, poverty. And so I really found that work draining and found that it wasn't in line with my values. But I did enjoy the content. Technology has been an incredibly powerful tool for our communities and for our movements. Just think about, Black Lives Matter, Standing Rock, uncovering the atrocities happening at the border, and even now with the Save Sheikh Jarrah movement we're seeing. You can see how the internet has been able to supercharge and expand movements and push them internationally. And I really wanted to continue working in that space, but on behalf of communities and not corporations. And that's not really something that I thought was possible. So I actually quit and became a housing organizer here in DC. And I was actually born here and have lived here for a little over 10 years. But one day I actually saw like a really peculiar job posting. And it was looking for grassroots organizers who also had experience in internet and tech policy. And I thought that was the oddest thing. And so I looked into the organization and found MediaJustice, who was really working to shift power from these really large tech conglomerates to communities and really make spaces on the internet, the infrastructure itself, work for communities of color, people living on low incomes, people with disabilities. And so I was just really intrigued by that work, and that's what I've been doing for the past 4 years. So that's how I got here. And really excited to be here today, and really excited to, answer some questions and dig into this with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Erin. Thank you for sharing more about your background. Chris, I know you were having some connection issues. If you're good to speak now, we can have you speak, or I can also have Tracy.
I'm good.
Okay.
Sorry, I apologize.
You're good. You're good, brother. You're good.
Yeah, I'm literally on the front lines in front of Amazon, trying to get these cards signed so we can hopefully form a union for the first time in American history. I'm sorry if I'm being interrupted. Got workers still coming up, and I'm really the only one man in the tent today until my volunteers come later. So for those who don't know me, my name is Chris Smalls, former Amazon employee, now founder of TCOEW, the Congress of Essential Workers, now lead organizer of ALU, Amazon Labor Union, standing in solidarity with the workers that are currently employed over here in Staten Island. I've been on the ground with them for the last, tomorrow will make a month for the first Yeah, it'll be the first month. And I've been out here every day since 4 in the morning to about sometimes 7, 8, 9 p.m. at night, trying to get as many workers to sign up for this union so we can also have an election like you saw in Alabama just over a month ago. So taking back to my story, I was fired last year by Amazon when I raised concerns right here at the same facility, JFK, protesting for the health and safety of my coworkers. After management told me not to tell my employees in my department that people were tested positive. As a supervisor for 4 years, a person of leadership, I just couldn't stand with the company. And, I had to take further action. I couldn't come home and be complacent, knowing that my extended family, who I consider my extended family, who I work 40, 50, 60 hours a week with, were going to go to work and possibly bring this virus home to their families. I held the protest March 30th. 2 hours after that protest, I was fired. A week after that, Jeff Bezos himself and his top general counsels, David Sapolsky, Jay Carney, they decided to have a smear campaign on me, calling me not smart or articulate, ironically to make me the whole face of the unionizing efforts against Amazon. So that was funny because now I'm trying to do that. And at the time, it was definitely disheartening, but it motivated me to do what I'm doing. We've been traveling the country, protesting in front of every Jeff Bezos mansion that we can find. We started in New York City at his $80 million mansion. We traveled down to Washington, D.C. to his $28 million mansion, which is actually a museum. We went out west to his $165 million mansion in Beverly Hills. We went to his first mansion in Medina, Seattle, and also the Amazon headquarters. And we also went to Alabama as well. So, our fight continues. These stories need to be told. These workers' voices need to be heard. And that's what I'm trying to do. Just continue to share everybody's story. When workers reach out to me, bring in the demonstrations, let them tell the world, the public, what's really going on when it comes to Amazon. And now we're trying to form our union. And I think if we are successful to get to a vote, this ain't Alabama, and New York is a union town. A lot of people know what unions represent up here. I think we'll be able to be successful. So thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to this. Thank you.
Awesome, Chris. And I'm believing in that success because you got D4BL, you got DMOS, and everybody in this chat. So we're going to get this done. We have to. There's no choice at this point. The abuses are out of control. Tracy, I'll let you introduce yourself and talk about your amazing work. And we'll get to the problems and we'll also get to some more solutions. So
it's really hard to follow Chris. I want to echo some appreciation. My favorite comment in the chat is Chris is that dude, and I agree. So my name is Tracy Quarter. I'm a deputy campaign director with Action Center on Race and the Economy, or ACRE. And I do our policing and incarceration as well as our tech work, which, considering all that we know is going on in the world, that has been like a perfect marriage of work. And I just consider myself lucky to get to work at this amazing place every day. We work at the intersection of racial justice and Wall Street accountability, and we really take it to corporations who are profiting off of our exploitation. I'll talk a little bit more about the work, a little bit about me. I'm from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I live in Oakland. I think both of those things are really important about me when it comes to my analysis and the way I look at this work. And I also, my background is in social work. And I believe that all cops with a conscience should quit their job. And that's actually why I quit being a social worker. Happy to talk more about that offline. But just like really looking at how we are being exploited by these systems in this country, how we dismantle them. Not do just enough to make people feel better about themselves, to check a box to say I did something, but actually doing the work to say that this is no longer okay and we're no longer going to take it. So I can pause there. I think that the work that we're going to share is going to be really important, and I would love to get into it.
Awesome. Thank you, Tracy. Well, you're actually up next for our next question. So we structured it. It's not just my moderating magic. We have a whole program script, child. Y'all know I'm Data for Black Lives. It's very organized and structured on the back end. The first question: how do problems of data capitalism and algorithmic racism show up in your area of focus? So folks kind of touched on it a little bit, but now we have some more time to kind of really dig in. So Tracy, and then Chris, Erin, and then Amy.
Well, thank you so much for asking that question. So ACRE just released a report on with the Community Resource Hub on 21st century policing, the rise and reach of surveillance technology in our communities. And so as my colleague Alex Goodwin reminds us, and I repeat every chance I get, police are the muscle of racial capitalism. They exist to protect property and wealth, and not to protect us. And so our demands to defund the police get louder and louder and more impossible to ignore. Capitalism has to figure out a way to adapt to our demands. And so one of the ways that policing has adapted capitalism is working to replace cops with cameras. So we see defunding the police as more than like a budget line item. A lot of times people say, oh, if you just move some money around, that's what we're talking about. And for ACRE, the way we look at it is more than that. We want to talk about removing money as removing power. We see this as a power and control issue for our communities. So if we take money away from police and remove them from our communities, we're not doing that so that they can morph into another form of policing. We see data capitalism show up a lot in this, specifically around predictive policing. So we're taking on ShotSpotter, which is a gunshot detection system, which claims to predict gunshots in communities. We're not able to even tell from anything they've put out how they determine which communities get ShotSpotter and then which communities police actually respond to. And then I know Chris is going to talk about Amazon, but we know that Amazon not only surveils their workers, but they also surveil our communities and our neighborhoods. So when we look at things like Amazon Ring, it's not just a doorbell system, it's a doorbell system that collaborates directly with policing that like gives them access to the neighborhood app on the back end. And so it's not sold that way to communities. It's sold as like, you can kind of see what's happening at your front door. You can catch if somebody's going to take your packages, when really it's a way for police to like create a really sophisticated surveillance network. And speaking of winning, like I said, our demands are getting larger and larger, and we're going to start seeing more wins. Yesterday, we saw Amazon announce that they're going to extend a moratorium on police using facial recognition technology. So companies who are collaborating with police are not doing so because they're concerned with our public safety. Amazon is not concerned with our public safety. Motorola is not concerned with our public safety. They are doing it because they're concerned with profit, and they see an opportunity to use our demands to like slide in there and get some extra money. And so those are like the ways that we see this this really important conversation around data capitalism showing up.
Awesome. Thank you, Tracy. And bringing us back to the role of funding, and when we say defund the police, what the next demands are within that, and how do we be clear about it's not just moving around money, but it's a lot more. So thank you for that. Chris?
Yes, I agree with everything Tracy just said. I would say for people that supporting Amazon right now to cancel their Prime, stand in solidarity with the workers for sure. But for further reasons, Amazon surveils, they do contribute into ICE and all the surveillance systems that she mentioned, the police departments. I think today I seen the article come out about Ring being one of the biggest surveillance systems in the country. So just imagine that they are watching us. And I know for a fact that police are definitely using these surveillance systems. Amazon facilities, just to give you an insight of what Amazon facilities are, like JFK, for example, over 1 million square feet, the size of 14 NFL football fields. But there's over 5,000 cameras in this building alone. So I'm being surveilled right now as I speak to you. And as far as customers and anybody that's a part of this movement, I can tell you now, defund Amazon. Stop shopping go to your local mom and pops, support the main street that you grew up on. Amazon takes over everything. They're trying to take over the world. It's like Pinky in the Brain, and there's no exaggeration here. So defunding Amazon, these major corporations, it's also defunding the police as well. They don't belong in our communities. We can come up with other ways, community, in-house surveillance where we can police our own selves. And that's what we need to talk about, have a conversation around that, instead of putting money into police unions and corporations that support them. So defund Amazon for sure.
Great. Thank you, Chris. Erin?
Absolutely. Defund Amazon. So my work touches on a little bit of a different area, but similar in some ways. Much like how capitalism is the foundation of some of the most violent and harmful institutions in this country, data capitalism serves a similar function in really amplifying and like hyper targeting the harms that Silicon Valley is able to sort of distribute to our communities. So what does this look like practically? Like generalized capitalism gives us redlining and discrimination in housing and jobs, right? Data capitalism and algorithmic racism gives us platforms like Facebook, allowing advertisers to target ads for housing and jobs based on race, gender, and age. They were actually sued by the NAACP LDF for doing this and settled out of court in early 2019. It also looks like platforms allowing voter suppression and intimidation to thrive on their platforms. It also looks like recruitment into racist and violent organizations and the proliferation of hate speech. Corporations like Facebook, and I want to shout out specifically YouTube on this one as well, are able to essentially stalk you around the internet and then send you deeper into violent rabbit hole content that essentially ends up radicalizing people into violence. And the effects of that are tangible for our communities. You see things like Tree of Life shooting, the El Paso massacres, the Kenosha Christchurch. And it's not just in the US, it's genocides in Myanmar, pogroms in India, and more, right? It also means that disinformation is able to thrive on the platform. We saw Stop the Steal organizing done in plain sight on event pages and groups on platform. And while Donald Trump was kicked off of the platform for now, figures like Steve Bannon and others remain platformed. Why? You have to ask yourself why. And it's because there's a political interest in keeping them on the platform and also a financial interest, right? And so we're really interested in like undermining those. Like Tracy had said before, Amazon is another company that profits from data capitalism at the expense of privacy and safety. Their entire business model is predicated on the extraction of our data, and then they use this data to build tools that expand and perpetuate criminalization in our communities. We already heard about Ring being put into neighborhoods, and that article that was just released, I just saw it too right before this, about it being the most expansive surveillance network in the US, and also a way to get around any regulation, oversight, or having to have any transparency about what are in these contracts. And then also, attempting to develop their facial recognition tools. I think there's also a more insidious way that this shows up in the fact that data in many ways is more valuable than oil. And just think about the ways that the oil industry has decimated the planet, right? These corporations have spent years stalking and surveilling our communities, selling that data to advertisers, data brokers, whoever else, in order to essentially print money. And then they take that money and use it to amass power with the ability to impact the news that we see, our public health, even our economy, our democracy, right? And with this increased power, they've actually also increased their lobbying power on the Hill and to regulators. And so they position themselves as wholly unaccountable to the communities they claim to be serving. Folks may know that Facebook and Amazon are now the two biggest corporate lobbying spenders in the country. And it's not just the US. I saw a bunch of people who were from Europe. I was just reading that the big 5 tech companies spent about 19 million euros lobbying the EU regulators as well. So this is an issue that's expanding and it's global, right? And then I just want to say also that this is an issue that's built on top of an ideological scaffolding that is both libertarian and tech chauvinist, which is to say that tech companies believe that their companies should be able to fix and change our world any way that they see fit and should not be regulated at all. And so when we're thinking about solutions to this, which I think we'll get into after this, we really need to be attacking that sort of ideology and that vision, and make sure that we're shifting power away from these companies and into our communities. And I'll stop there. I think I'm probably over my 3 minutes.
No worries, Erin. Thank you for sharing that. And yes, we will get into solutions, but I think it's important, everything you said about it being an ideological battle, and the fight being that on top of other things. So yeah. Amy, you have the floor.
Yeah, that was so powerful. I'm going to talk about what we call in the report the consumer marketplace. And I'm actually going to take a break from Facebook and Amazon for a moment to talk about some other companies surveilling and collecting data on us. That's Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. Those are the credit reporting companies. We all know if we ever want to buy a car, get a credit card, start a small business, get a home loan, in some cases rent an apartment, get auto insurance, or even get a job, we need good credit. Otherwise, we're paying more for these things every month, or we don't even get access to them at all. And good credit, those credit scores come from algorithms, right? It's computer code, so it must be neutral and scientific, right? It can't discriminate because it's just math. Well, you didn't come to a panel on algorithmic racism to hear that, so you know that's not true. The algorithms, which are secret, are based on our borrowing and repayment behavior, and how much we have to borrow to get through life and how much we're able to repay is based on factors like wealth, geography, and job opportunities, all factors that are deeply shaped by our history of systemic racism in this country. So TransUnion itself never collects racial data. They don't know that I'm white, but my borrowing and repayment patterns are consistent with someone who has had access to a certain amount of wealth and opportunities that enable me to pay my bills on time. And so I'm judged worthy of a lower rate on my credit card. I like to talk about credit reporting because it's so clear that what the economic stakes are in this area. But we do see those same basic dynamics with a whole host of online data that Google and Amazon and Facebook and a bunch of smaller companies collect and resell. As with credit reporting, we don't have a meaningful opportunity to opt out of having data collected about us without actually excluding ourselves from economic and social activity. The data that's used to score us can be wrong or misleading. Credit reporting data very often is, and error rates are actually higher for Black consumers. And it's hard to access our own data to check it, and it is even harder to correct it when we find errors. Then our data, much of it wrong, is evaluated by secret algorithms that we're never allowed to see or weigh in on because they're corporate trade secrets. So they judge us, we can't judge them. And they're used to make decisions about our life that we may never know about. So with credit reporting, people fought for and won laws that actually say we have to be notified when credit data is being used. But we don't even have that law when Facebook is using our data to decide whether to show us an ad for a predatory lender or actually a lucrative investment opportunity. We never know that decision's being made. And so the result is a feedback loop where people with less wealth or who are disadvantaged in some way, more likely to be Black and brown consumers, turn out to be marginalized, continue to be marginalized, and further excluded from wealth building, even when advertisers are not explicitly targeting ads by race. And they're doing it not because someone has a personal racial bias, but because that's what makes them the most money. And so that's how data capitalism shows up in this one area of our lives, the consumer marketplace.
Awesome. Thank you, Amy. Great. Everything you said about credit scoring, and I think especially knowing that there are these bigger, huge, massive companies that we sadly have to see and interact with every day. Somebody put a question about how can we as progressive organizations, for example, not use Amazon Web Services, right? But then there's these companies as well that I know, Experian and Equifax and even the Fair and Isaac Corporation, they've been using machine learning since the 1960s, right? So it's very historical, it's very embedded. But we also don't want to get overwhelmed, right? While Data for Black Lives, we're not going to outspend some of these companies on lobbying. We're not going to outfight them, but we can outfight them because what we believe is the most important thing, what the most important solution is building real power, building a movement, not gaining new followers, but creating more leaders, right? That's the only way that we'll be able to really expose these issues, address them, but I believe create a whole new blueprint, right? Where we're able to reclaim data as protest, data as a power, and data as accountability. And right now, I want to switch the conversation to talking about what are some of the ways that we are building power to address data capitalism, as well as what are the policies and practices that would be particularly impactful. I know already on the panel, folks brought up things like defunding Amazon, most importantly, building this union, making sure that we have this union, more accountability around credit scoring, continuing to push back on the ideological regime and that these companies push in addition to their products. So what are some of the solutions? What are policies and practices? How about we start with Tracy? You can dig into the work around policing.
Sure. So I know for ACRE, part of the way we talk about this and what is important for us is embedding this analysis into all the campaigns that we run. So we always are asking this question, who profits? We see part of our value as making sure that we bring that to every space that we're in. So for an example, ACRE is part of the steering committee of the People's Coalition for Safety and Freedom. And this is a collection of organizations that are looking to repeal the 1994 crime bill and rewrite it through a participatory people's process. So people who have been most impacted by the crime bill can then say what the solutions are. Because if you remember, the narrative around the crime bill was that, oh, Black people wanted this, communities asked for this. And really what it was is the communities that they were talking to at the time maybe suggested something like this, right? And so that wasn't people who were directly impacted. And so we're going to make sure that surveillance technology and data capitalism is central to that conversation because for too long, they've been separate. We also want to make sure that we name and shame people. Like shaming people works and it's important. And so I think about our Crescendo project, which takes on anti-Muslim corporations and talks about people who are profiting off of bigotry. We look at companies like YouTube that have a very specific business model that looks to, uses our data to suggest what to watch next. So just like me, if I'm watching a video on like how to do a twist out, which I normally do on my hair, right? Like they then suggest other DIY hairstylists. And if a white supremacist is watching videos on YouTube and they then get advertising money to suggest the next white supremacist video. And so if people don't know that, if we're not naming and shaming YouTube, who is then owned by Google and is making these like huge like decisions in our lives, like that is important. We have to be able to like explain to people that that's happening because before working at ACRE, I didn't even know that was happening. And so all of that is what we bring to the table. All of that analysis is important to infuse in campaigns and then to really push for like a public ownership of data. We have to disrupt the capitalism that's taking place. We have to disrupt how much money people are able to make using our data. So if we own it, if we are the people who direct it, if we are the people who have control over it, then corporations and companies become more accountable to us and can't profit off of it the same way.
Awesome. Thank you, Tracy. Erin?
Yes. I feel like there's a lot that I could say here. But similarly to what Tracy was saying, so we think about building power. I'm going to touch on three things here. Building power through coalition. So much like Tracy was saying, we really think it's important to be in community with folks who are attacking this issue from different angles. You know, when I was a younger organizer, somebody who was a mentor to me would often say, if you have incomplete understandings of the problem, you're always going to come up short with the solution. There's always going to be people missing. And so when you're in coalition and able to think about all the different ways an issue is impacting different communities, I think you're able to come up with a more complete solution to these problems. Some of the coalitions that we're a part of around disinformation is the Disinformation Defense League here in the US, which is a group of researchers, on the ground organizers and activists, nonprofits, all different types of groups that are focusing on different things that come together and talk about how disinformation is impacting our communities. And we've done that through a number of different things. We, release research through the DDL. We also have done trainings for members and also for wider audiences on how to make interventions in disinformation. And then we also take our grievances directly to companies and to lawmakers, right, to their regulators. And so we're really interested in advancing that work and also focusing on education as well, because we know that when it comes to disinformation, the people who are on the platforms are oftentimes the first responders. Companies move really slowly, again, because there's a profit incentive for them to not take content off of the platform. And so we wanted to be able to give folks on the ground, again, shifting that power, the tools to be able to intervene when they see their friends, family, community members talking about this info. We also work through a coalition called Change the Terms. Some of you may be familiar with it. That does organizing and advocacy around content moderation policies. So working directly with and challenging the corporations to make the necessary content moderation policy changes so that, quite frankly, white supremacists aren't able to organize on the platforms, and also Black and brown activists aren't censored. And then the third coalition that I'll talk about is Athena, and really want to lift up, and this is, a few people on this panel are actually a part of this, the Eyes on Amazon campaign, which Tracy was talking about earlier, which really focuses on, calling Amazon to the map for the ways that they are, supercharging and pushing policing through technology into our communities, and through, worker surveillance, like all of these different harmful ways that Amazon shows up in our communities. So I'll drop just quickly a link there. So you can see and sign up. We'll be having more events later in the month and into June as well. Then I also wanted to talk about, again, challenging the ideology and culture. Like I said, these companies and corporations have been able to advance so far because they do a really good job of narrative organizing. They drag out the, like, I was founded in a garage, story every single time they're, challenged on this or brought in to testify in front of Congress. And so we really want to undercut that and tell the real stories about what these corporations are doing in our communities. It was a really difficult but necessary cultural fight to actually even get corporations to take any moderation action on their platforms. They were telling the cultural story of, free speech, First Amendment rights, and it took a lot of organizing from folks in the Change the Terms coalition and others working in this space to really undermine that position, to the point where now they're making concessions about what is and isn't allowed on the platform, deplatforming people like Donald Trump and others, and really pushing the conversation forward. There's so much more to do in that area, but that was definitely a huge ideological fight. And then last, I'll just say, sorry, I know I'm over 3 minutes, but last I'll just say some policy recommendations is that we're really interested, again, in undercutting the business model of these corporations that are essentially stalking us and selling our data or using it to build out tools that then eventually harm us, right? And so we're really interested in data privacy, not just data privacy for the sake of data privacy, but again, as a tool to shift power from corporations to our communities. So that means limiting even what information is able to be collected, or giving users ownership over our own data. It's really an issue for us of self-determination, which is a foundational tenet to Black liberation struggles. And so we don't just see that, we don't want to just see that here, you know, in the physical realm, but as an extension of our data bodies as well. So that's what I would say that we're doing to work on this issue and solutions that we'd like to see.
Thank you, Erin, for bringing up self-determination. I think that is at the heart of our call to action for Abolish Big Data. It is at the heart of the work that we do at Data for Black Lives. And even especially the piece somebody put in the chat too about this whole, I started the company in the garage story. You know, what those stories are used, as you so brilliantly explained, to really achieve, you know, change the ideology, change the narrative, and to erase the realities. While we talking about Jeff Bezos, I don't even know what his story he's spinning now. Folks within these 3,000 foot distribution centers are being exposed to COVID, are experiencing crazy conditions. So Chris, I want you to talk about some of the solutions, but also the importance of a union. I think sadly, some of the ideological war that we've experienced was that workers' rights, collective bargaining, unions have been attacked in general, right? And right now we really need them. We need workers' rights, especially in the age of big data. So Chris, I would love for you to talk about that or whatever else you want to talk about in terms of solutions.
Absolutely. You know, we talking about generational wealth as well, then we need to be talking about unions. And, you know, like you mentioned, since the 1930s, there was an uprising after economic collapse, the Great Depression. And we've seen the same thing in 2020. And then there should be what I think Alabama sparked is the uprising of unions in this country again. And I'm gonna throw out some numbers. You know, 1.5 million workers worldwide for Amazon. Only 8% of the management is Black or brown or indigenous. Only 8%. And I believe for the first time in their 27 years of existence, they finally added a Black woman to the S team. And we're all supposed to, you know, give praise to them for doing that. But that is a setback, obviously, way overdue. And I can tell you from myself, my own experience, in my 5 years, almost 5 years, I applied to be a manager 49 times and I never got it. But I watched as my white counterparts come in with less experience, got promoted right over me after I trained. So that's the importance of why we need a union. And one issue that we can address for a solution, but also accountability. You know, if you would have told me 1.5 years ago that I'll be leading or one of the faces of a leading movement against Amazon, I would have looked at you like you had 10 eyes or 10 heads, because I was just a concerned supervisor and a father, and still a father. And you know, I just want to tell people to take action. You know, join some of these coalitions, join some of these organizations, join some of these nonprofits. You want to look back on this time, and I would say the window of opportunity was COVID-19. You don't want to look back on this time and say that you did nothing, or you sat back and watched on the sidelines. While you have, you know, a chance or an opportunity, take action. You know, get involved with things in your community. Donate to these organizations. Definitely donate to this independent worker-led union. This is actually worker-led. It's not an established union with millions of dollars. We're not the RBDSU. We don't have any big brother unions. We don't have anything. This is literally us putting together a GoFundMe and me spending every dollar of my unemployment check to go into this fight right now. And this is really David versus Goliath. And I said this in many times, before, we all got to be David. Everybody has to be David versus Amazon, or any behemoth of a company like Walmart, Target, Whole Foods. We all have to fight back, and that's the community that we come from. Got to understand, the people that run these corporations, they don't come from these communities. Jeff Bezos can't come to this community and can't come to this warehouse and do anything in his warehouse. He can't pack a box 250 times an hour. He can't work in my department picking customers' orders 400 times an hour. He can't do any of that. So who really holds the wealth and power? It's us. And as a sense to workers, we have to hold our highest plateau accountable as well. Joe Biden needs to pass the PRO Act. He can put an executive order in right now and stop Amazon from union busting, doing the things they're doing. And I can even show y'all better than tell y'all since I'm here. This fence wasn't here last week. This fence that says private property, that wasn't here last week. It was because we set up and we fed over 200 workers with a free barbecue. Amazon decided to put up a fence and call the cops on us. Didn't realize that, once again, we're in New York and the police officers are unionized. So they just didn't care. They called the fire department on us. The fire department was also mad as well, wasting their time. This is how we just expose the things, we hold people accountable, and we take action. And hopefully we'll have some real results and ultimately get to some solutions as well. And that's just my activism side speaking, but just support everybody you can, support unions, support nonprofits, support coalitions, get involved. Don't let this moment of opportunity pass you. And that's my advice. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I know folks are asking for the GoFundMe as well as your Cash App and Venmo. So maybe you can text it to our thread, or you can put it in yourself. I think that's really important that we support you in that way too, and link it. And I mean, everything you said in it beyond that, right? There's so much there. I know, Amy, we're both co-authors. So if you want to add anything else about the, I know Chris touched on generational wealth, right? And what this is also about. Right? So I'll let you step into.
I want to see how we're doing on time as well.
Pretty good. This is
the last day on time, yeah. So yeah. I so appreciated hearing that from Chris, and appreciating Tracy's point and Erin's point about using privacy to shift power and own our own data. And I'll say this about policy, going back to the credit reporting question and all of the data, we shouldn't have to pay a fee to see our credit reports and credit scores, or any of the information that's collected about us. So no more keeping our data secret from us. Collectively, we need the right to examine and question the algorithms that are being used to make these important decisions about our lives. If they're judging and evaluating us, we need to be able to evaluate them. And so I have a proposal that deals with credit reporting specifically, but we can think about how it applies to Google and Facebook and all these other companies making money off our data. We need to recognize credit reporting specifically is part of our public infrastructure. It's a gateway to participation in our economy, to get a loan or an apartment or insurance. And yet credit reporting is controlled by 3 companies that have this arbitrary, unaccountable power over our financial destinies. So my proposal, and this is the solutions part, right? Not just the problem. I propose that credit reporting be public, that we have a publicly controlled credit registry. Maybe I'll put that link to that proposal in the chat as well. That we have a publicly controlled credit registry where individuals can not only access our own data for free and hold companies accountable for its accuracy, but the algorithms used to create credit scores should be opened up to scrutiny and reconsidered. Now, I want to be clear, a better credit algorithm is not going to eliminate racial wealth inequality. I've heard some folks say that that's not going to happen. We need to have real investments and reparations for that. but it can cut one form of institutional discrimination that is permeating our economic system today, which is judging people's worthiness to access economic opportunities based on a legacy of discrimination. People in the first place should not have to borrow to make ends meet in this country. If we had real living wages, if we had strong unions, which people like Chris are working to build right now, if we had public goods like free higher education and affordable housing, credit would not be so important to begin with, right? But as long as we're going to have lending at all, we need to make lending decisions in ways that are not discriminatory. And that means making credit scoring algorithms public and publicly controlled. I want to say one more thing, which is it does not mean that everybody knows my credit score or that I know all of your credit scores. It means we all know how credit scores are determined, exactly what goes into them and what factors are weighed. And we've worked to make sure that factors that are a proxy for race are minimized, eliminated as much as possible. It means all consumers begin to have power over the data and algorithms that are used to make decisions about our lives, and that Black and brown consumers who have been the most marginalized can actually exercise power.
Great. I'm glad you brought that in, the public credit registry demand. Yes, that is a powerful demand to me, because once I learned how private and how corporate, and what does that mean? When it's private, that means that algorithm is proprietary too. And when it's proprietary, we can't hold it accountable. You can't sue an algorithm. And that is impacting so many people's lives. So that is a demand that I think are the kind of demands that we need to be making more, and we will always push back and press and push forward. So thank you, Amy. Now we're in Q&A. We almost have to wrap up and go like in 20 minutes. So thank you all for bringing in your questions, and hopefully we have a time for a couple, but the very first question, a couple people asked this. I don't want to butcher your name, Saigina, Madeline. How can people advocate from within, especially if they're within Goliath? For example, a tech worker, or working on something for short-term improvement in people's lives that rely on using the system, you know, financial coaching or improved credit scores. Can you organize from within? So it's like, there's kind of three questions here. I can actually respond first from Data for Black Lives perspective. This is a really important question, because in addition to obviously our network being made up of on the ground activists, folks who kind of had my experiences, a lot of our folks, Black scientists, white allies, are people who are kind of learning about some of these issues and really digging in for the first time, and also are like, oh snap, I don't want the thing that I'm passionate about, which is math, science, and engineering, be continued to use to harm people. So that's part of the reason why we started D4BL, was to create a political home for people, to be able to get the political education, and then also support organizing work where they live, right? So that's why we have our Hubs program in 6 different cities now. We're also expanding, but we're constantly thinking about how do we change the cast of characters, and also how do we create spaces for people. But I'll also let other folks on the panel, and people can jump in. Everybody can jump in and answer if they'd like.
I can respond quickly to, I think, one piece of that, and that is tech workers who are, you know, working inside of Goliaths can absolutely be disruptive to companies. Some of the more disruptive things we've seen in the past probably year or so has been tech workers from inside companies speaking out and speaking publicly, right? It disrupts the facade of you know, the company, that everybody is in lockstep and that there's no dissent, right? So I think it's important for tech workers to do a couple of things. One, to organize with your fellow workers, and to be doing political education and really thinking about and being in community with, you know, advocates like the folks who are on this panel, and also folks who are working in warehouses, the folks who are doing the actual, you know, the content moderating contractors, the folks who are the least paid in your, you know, in your company, who are facing the brunt of, you know, the work that you're doing, right? So I think it's important to be in solidarity, and to also be lifting up your, you know, being raising your own consciousness and the consciousness of other people in your organization, and also speaking publicly when you can. I know that it, takes a lot, right? It takes, you're risking potentially your financials, but this is where we are, right? This is like in the long lineage of organizing work, is people stepping out and getting into line with their values, and taking those risks, and building out those solidarity networks so that they're not stepping out there alone. And so I think it's incredibly important, like I said, in challenging some of those, we say within our work with Facebook that Facebook moves when there's a PR crisis. It's not because you like show them that something is harming somebody, which is what you would think it would be, right? It's because, somebody from within the company spoke up, revealed something, there's negative PR, it can be a whole host of those things. And so we depend on, and I think the companies know that we depend on people sort of like revealing and being sort of class traders, right? And like, sharing the things that they know, whistleblowing on their way out, all of these things, right? So that's what I would say to that question.
Excellent. Thank you, Erin. Chris, Amy, or Tracy, want to add anything?
Yeah, I would just piggyback and also say, tech workers can do anything, really, like she said, take action. And I think putting together a petition, addressing the issues, sharing that petition within the company, that's also powerful. We've seen that a number of times throughout the course of the pandemic with certain companies, especially Amazon in Seattle, the tech workers, the ones that were fired, the Google workers as well, they're doing that. Continue doing it. That's all I can say. I had this question asked to me yesterday. So yeah, please speak out, stand in solidarity, especially with the warehouse workers. That solidarity right there is very powerful, and that obviously draw a lot of attention, and it would definitely create some type of systemic changes within the company. So please do anything. Y'all can do anything, because y'all are the salary workers. We are the hourly workers. The salary workers, y'all have more of a voice. That's just how it is. And use it to uplift ours, the ones that are at the bottom of the totem pole. And that is always, an easy way to do it. Starting a petition, talking to your coworkers, sending a chain letter out, sending the email out to the highest person in your department. Do these type of things. Try to draw media attention as well. Connect with activists and organizers. These type of things also are very powerful.
Excellent. Thank you. Amy or Tracy, you want to add anything? We can move to the next question. Okay. Yes. So to summarize, not only can you, and not only is it possible, but you should, right? And I know it's difficult, but I want to offer Data for Black Lives and other spaces, all the other organizations that are tech workers union, so many folks who are really trying to build up that camaraderie and solidarity and that organizing, so that folks are not going at it themselves. They're going at it as a group, as a collective too. So the next question is, and I'm just reading the quote too. There is a lot of focus on transparency as a means to challenge data capitalism. But can't that backfire? There's transparency in credit reports, but did that not squash the credit bureaus or diminish credit scoring or a FICO? So by pushing for some of these transparent ethics, doesn't that reinforce big tech power? So the question is, what are the limits of calls for transparency as a solution? Can it backfire like some of the virtue signaling that we're seeing that companies are doing?
I could take this one or
Go
start
ahead.
on it. All right. Look, I think transparency is a tool, but it's not the whole solution. I think one reason that algorithms are exacerbating power imbalances is because corporations are empowered to keep them secret and unquestionable. And if we peel back those layers of secrecy around data extraction and algorithmic decision-making to understand how they really operate, that's transparency, that's necessary, but It's a necessary first step for building power to reverse that one-way mirror of surveillance and secret decisions. It's not the whole power building, it's just a step. So it can't shift power on its own if you just expose contracts. Some people are focused on, I'm going to show how our police department has a particular contract. That is a tool. That can be a powerful tool. It's not the whole fight. Or revealing what the algorithms are, that's not sufficient to actually create equity or justice unless it actually contributes to further types of change.
Awesome. Thank you. Tracy?
Yeah, I think that when I think about that, I think about it when we talk about police abolition and how we do that work. It's like, how is this part of the larger story? So we can talk about transparency because they're not transparent. And that means that we need to do all these other things. So we can talk about, I don't know, like a specific police reform, knowing that our North Star is something different. So I think that when we organize around transparency, it's the way that we talk about it. We should not frame it as like a huge win. We should frame it as the bare minimum. And so when we start talking about it in that way and start moving conversation about things that are tangible for people, so transparency is a tangible step, that makes it easier for us to organize towards something bigger.
Excellent. Thank you. And actually, the next question is also for you, Tracy. One person asked about the future of facial recognition used by police departments. So even though we have these moratoriums and bans, and I know that's part of the amazing work of MediaJustice, what is the local work going to look like in terms of in place of a federal ban? And just anything else you want to talk about how we can move forward with addressing some of these on the ground. And perhaps Erin might want to chime in as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that for us, it is when we put out the 21st Century Policing Report, the very first, I'm going to keep hammering this, the very first recommendation we had was defunding the police. Because what we know is that all of these things like are adaptable. All of these things, so like we ban one thing and then they'll do something else. We replace one camera, they're going to put up another one. And so to get to the heart of the issue, we need to actually remove that power. So it is really important that organizers on the ground see that their activism is moving the needle. It is really important to be able to celebrate wins, and it's important to say, okay, what is the next thing? So the future of all of this is to say, okay, we banned facial recognition. Now, what is the next thing that we're going to do? How are we going to continue to tell the story of surveillance? So we've banned this thing from Amazon. I bet you that part of the reason they said they would do this facial recognition ban is because this big article about how there are huge surveillance network was coming out the next day. So how is it that we continue to build upon our wins to tell a larger story of how this is not what community safety is? This is how we actually should define community safety. And this is who is profiting off of not keeping our community safe.
Thank you. I don't know, Erin, if you wanted to also add to that.
No, Tracy said it all. That was really all encompassing. Thank you.
Yes. And I can add one thing. I would be remiss not to. So at D4BL, one of the things that we're launching that we've already launched some kind of reporting on, but we're working on is a web tool that would help people kind of keep track of what kind of, as we define them, data weapons are being used in their communities. The shot spotter technologies, automated license plate readers, things like that. Folks at EFF built out their Atlas database, but we're doing something a tiny bit different just to kind of focus in on places where Black folks live, as well as building our own tools so that people can then look up or connect with other folks on model resolutions, other kind of things that can help push these policies out and push affirmative policies in. And I want to lift up the work happening in Detroit by our National Organizing Director, Tawana Petty, where in a city that's 80% Black, the fight to ban facial recognition is a bit different. And they've taken it to the state level to rewrite Detroit's city charter to enshrine human and civil rights and to make it so that it's difficult. Because they've been banned before, but the police department was actually using these technologies without folks knowing. So that's one strategy. That's a cog in the wheel of this ongoing thing. So I'll add that piece. So, okay, we have time for one last question. And that is coming from our chat. For those who are ready to move forward on the implicit call of the Data Capitalism report, how can we connect? How can we stay in touch? I believe this is a call for obviously our panelists about how we can stay in touch with them, but also with folks in the chat. And it's been very exciting from the moderator and to see everything that's been going on in here. So thank you all for being so active. So, in addition to that question, I'll also give time for each panelist to kind of close off with anything they want to say or anything from the points that they want to emphasize. And then I'll just bring it to my closing. So who wants to go first? We'll start with you, Chris.
Perfect. I just want to say thank you for having me today. This was a powerful discussion, and I'm so happy to be here sharing this space with you all. I'm just gonna say this in closing. You know, we're out here on the ground every day. If you're in the New York area, New Jersey area, if you'd like to come volunteer with us, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. You can follow me on Twitter at @shut_down Amazon. It's no surprise there. Also Instagram, Chris.Smalls. My organization at TCOEW, the Congress of Essential Workers. The Amazon Labor at Amazon Labor on Twitter as well. Instagram and Facebook as well. Reach out to us if you would like to get involved with our campaign. Once again, it's going to take all of us to be David versus Goliath. We want to be successful this time, and this is New York, and the energy is different. On May 1st, we brought 1,000 workers to Jeff Bezos' house. When it comes times for these rallies, we don't want to just wait for politicians and celebrities to show up. I want the community to be behind us beforehand. We want to make sure that they're connecting with workers right now. So reach out to us, get involved, come visit us at our tent. We love visitors. We have barbecues every week. Our next barbecue is on Monday, possibly from 12 to about 8 p.m. at night. Please come on by, grab a plate, bring a cooler, whatever you like to do. Let's connect with these workers, stand up for these workers, and fight back with these workers. And that'll be all I have to offer. Thank you so much. And thank you all for listening. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Chris. You could expect us out there. Data for Black Lives New York City Hub. I know some of y'all are in the chat. We'll see you out there. I'll send it a Facebook message, everybody. How about who wants to go next? Tracy? Awesome.
Sure, I got kind of lost talking in the chat. And so part of what I wanted to bring to folks were saying like defund the police was like a problematic term for voters. And I just want to talk about like what we mean when we organize. And so even like, I think that we have gotten caught up in a bunch of election cycles that meant that like voting was like the kind of end goal, or like what like polling is this end goal. And though I know there's a lot of data folks on the call, I think that some of our organizing has to go beyond polling. Like we actually have to like organize around morality and then make it poll well. And so many things didn't start off that way. The Fight for 15, I remember being on the strike lines at the very, very beginning, and people went nuts on me. Like folks were like, why would I pay somebody at McDonald's $15 an hour? Like that was the kind of normal talking point that we heard back. And now you better not step into any space with us talking about anything less than $15 an hour. Right. And so like we have to continue to organize to normalize these, like our demands. Our demands are not small. Our demands don't poll well at the beginning. Our demands are important because we organize around them. And so I just want to encourage people to pick a demand that has like a real North Star that disrupts power, that actually like really like shakes the foundation of what is wrong in this country, capitalism, and organize around it to make it popular. So I just appreciate being here. I appreciate sharing space with y'all, with so many brilliant people who I've looked up to. And Chris, I'm looking forward to supporting you in any way that I can.
Awesome. Thank you, Tracy. One demand that we're pushing, this is just us, not DMOS, abolish credit. So somebody said Chinese credit scores. Yes, we want to abolish those too. Thank you for somebody who was holding us down in the chat too. Yes, all forms of power, abolish credit. More on that soon. Erin, and then Amy, you can go last just because you're a co-author. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like so energized listening to Chris and Tracy speak. But something that Tracy was saying really brought up for me is that, yeah, a lot of times in our organizing work, like they said, we can get sucked into sort of these like electoral or very short timelines for things. But when I think about organizing and the way I was trained as an organizer, we situate these fights. This is a long, protracted struggle, right? This is something that we're going to be fighting around for a long time. And we need more people. So something I want to, leave people with is join the fight and bring people with you. Bring somebody as well to, if you're going to a meeting to politicize yourself about something, ask a friend if they want to join as well, because we need more people. We're taking down these companies like bit by bit. We're trying to, steal power where we can, and we need more people. And I would also say that for me, this is one of the greatest issues of our time. The way our data is mined, the way that we're stalked on the internet, and how that data is used against us and to perpetuate racism and violence is one of the greatest issues of our time. And so I just want to situate that as like, this is not something that's on the periphery. It's not, something that is tangential to, our liberation. But for us, I think at MediaJustice, something that, is foundational to getting us all free. If you want to connect with MediaJustice, I'll drop our links to our stuff in the chat here. Oop. And I think that'll be it for me. Check out some of our campaigns, get down with whatever makes sense for the type of work that you do. And I'm looking forward to chatting with you all. So here's where we are.
Thank you, Erin. Amy?
Yeah, I'm just basking in the power of the organizers, including you, Yeshi, that we have on this panel, and appreciating it, and thankful to everyone. If folks want to know more about the work we do at DMOS, they can go to our website, demos.org. I don't have a lot more to offer than that, but thank you all for sharing your energy and perspectives, and thanks to everyone who joined us today.
Wonderful. Thank you, Amy. And you have a lot to offer. We put it all in this paper. Oh my goodness. I hate to close it out because I think the conversation's actually already getting started, but I do have to close. I know folks have to go back to work and do things. But I had a special closing that I had planned, and I know I want you guys to read the report, but one of the movements that inspires me the most is actually the Zapatista movement, solidarity with Mexico, Chiapas, Mexico. What they were able to do is indigenous people, poor people, peasants, farmers, to confront Mexican government, but also internationally, to say that the system of neoliberalism that was being put on was not enough was enough. And I actually going to be reading a selection from the leader of the Zapatista movement. He has a book called Our Weapon, Our Word is Our Weapon. In our dreams, we have seen another world. March 1st, 1994, to the Mexican people and to the people and governments of the world. In our dreams, we have seen another world, an honest world, a world decidedly more fair than in one in which we live now. We sat in this world and there was no need for armies. Peace, justice, and liberty were so common that no one talked about them as far off concepts, but as things such as bread, birds, air, water, like book and voice. This is how the good things were named in this world. And in this world, there was reason and goodwill in government. And the leaders were clear-thinking people, and they ruled by obeying. This world was not a dream from the past. It was something that came to us from our ancestors. It came from ahead, from the next steps we were going to take. And so we started to move forward to attain this dream. Make it come and sit down at our tables, light our homes, grow in our cornfields, fill the hearts of our children, wipe our sweat, heal our history. And it was for all. This is what we want, nothing more, nothing less. Now we follow our path toward our true heart to ask what we must do. We will return to our mountains to speak in our own tongue and in our own time. And he closes by saying, thank you to the brothers and sisters all over the world who looked after us. May your footsteps follow our path. Liberty, justice, democracy. Thank you all so much for your time. And until next time, Dead for Black Lives DMOS, we love you. We appreciate you. We see you. Look out for the recording. Everyone have a wonderful rest of your week, a wonderful weekend, and an amazing summer. Thank you all.